Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Yes, it's the Skeptic Zone podcast, episode number 771 for the 16th of July, 2023. Richard Saunders coming to you from, let me look out the Skeptic Zone window. Oh, overcast. That makes a change. Overcast, Sydney, Australia. Coming up on this week's episode, I speak to author Daniel Simons, who, together with Christopher Chabris, has written a book called Nobody's Fool: Why We Get Taken In and What We Can Do About It. This book has only just been released, and it's all about things like Ponzi schemes, fraudulent science, crypto hucksters, and other scams out there in the wide world. How to arm yourself against these scams and what these scams are all about. Nobody's Fool interview with Daniel Simons coming up at the top of the show. Following that, it's Maynard's spooky action. Maynard heads back to Sydney Skeptics in the pub for part 2 of his interviewing pub goers and our guest speaker, Annie McCubbin. What a great night that was, and what a packed room it was. Then it's Adrienne Hill from Skookum Studios in Calgary, Canada, with this week's Australian Skeptics Newsletter, plus the Canadian word of the week. And it's not moose. Then to round off the show, in the Trove archives, we look for ghostly cats. I think there are a couple of ghostly cats here. I just saw one coming around the corner of the room through the door. Hang on. 2 of them sitting out near the stairs. Yes, what do you want? You want to speak to anybody? You've got a big audience. No, they're just looking at me. A big shout out to my teacher friends who are going back to their duties. And what would we do without teachers? Very important job and a very difficult job. A very difficult job it is to be a teacher these days. And also a shout out to listener Mike, who wrote me a very nice letter saying how he enjoys listening to the Skeptic Zone all the way from the United States. And new Patreon contributor Richard from Canada. Great to have you on board. But now it's time for me to run downstairs, avoiding the cats who are just outside the door. And they've had their breakfast, otherwise you'd be hearing it. They'd be at my feet jumping up on the microphone. Very demanding. But it's time for me to run downstairs and have some nice peanut butter toast with a coffee. While I do that, I hope you enjoy the Skeptic Zone. Now, folks, in the skeptical world, the skeptical business, we love to tell other people, don't be fooled, don't be fooled, be on your guard. But you know what? We're all human and we have to be on our guard as well. And it's come to my notice that a book has just been published, and it's called Nobody's Fool: Why We Get Taken In and What We Can Do About It. Sounds like a very interesting book indeed. In fact, it is. It's by Daniel Simons and Christopher Chabris, and I'm delighted to say that Daniel Simons is joining me on the line right now. Hello, Daniel.
Hello.
Now, you're a professor of psychology at the University of Illinois. That sounds like a very interesting job.
Yeah, it's a really good department, and we have lots of interesting people, so yeah, it's a great place to be.
Now, you together with Dr. Christopher Chabris have written this book, Nobody's Fool, and I was lucky enough a few weeks ago to get an advanced copy of the book. I've been thumbing through the book, and we'll get to some of the more interesting parts of the book for me a bit later. Now, what's the idea about putting a book out like this? Is this a manual for not being fooled? Is this an early warning system? What's the idea?
I think calling it a manual would be overselling, because there's nothing that we can do that will stop us from being fooled all the time, right? So the way I'm viewing this is it's our take on how deception actually works, how it is that we get fooled, and why. So by understanding sort of the cognitive principles that lead us to fall into traps, fall into pitfalls, to get fooled, you can kind of start to spot those cases before they happen. So our hope is that it will help people to prevent themselves from being fooled in ways that actually matter to them. It's kind of a description of the habits and tendencies and patterns of thought that we have that work great for us the vast majority of the time. But when somebody's looking to deceive us, they use those against us.
Let's take the long view here about us as a species and how our brains develop. And I think this is something you cover in the book, and I think it's safe to say that we as a species have been evolved to think that when somebody tells us something, we assume it's the truth.
Yeah, absolutely. It's what we call a truth bias. And there are a lot of philosophers and psychologists who've made the argument that whenever we hear something, when we first hear it, we just take it to be true, right? And it takes effort and thought and deliberation to maybe ask ourselves, is that really true? Or to even just remain uncertain. And for the most part, that makes a ton of sense, right? Most of the time when we're interacting with people, they aren't constantly lying to us. Right? Our normal day-to-day interactions are based on truth. And if we didn't make that assumption, we could never get around in the world, right? We could never interact with other people. We could never get anything done because we'd be constantly second-guessing every word, every phrase, every sentence. So it makes sense that we have this sort of a default to assuming that we're dealing with somebody telling us the truth.
Yes, you're absolutely right. It's something we come across in the skeptical game a lot of times. And I think you're right. I think this is the default position. And I think there's very good reasons for this from our evolutionary past. We can't go around questioning everything all the time. Will this door open? What happens if I stand here? What is happening around the corner? If we did that, we'd get nowhere in life. But it is an interesting inroad for the less scrupulous of us in society to take advantage of that. And I hesitate to say it's not a laziness of thinking on our part. It's how we're structured.
It's an efficiency. It makes sense, right? And that's true for most of the sort of habits and modes of thought that we have, that we discuss in this book, is that they work great for us the vast majority of the time because deception is relatively rare, right? I mean, as people in the skeptic community are actively looking for it, right? You see it a lot more in the same way that when we were writing this book and reading about all these cons and deceptions and fraudsters, it's our base rate for that is much higher. So we see it a lot more. But in practice, in our daily lives, there's not that much deception that matters, right? For most of us, most of the time. So it makes sense to assume that's not what we're going to be encountering. You don't want to be questioning everybody. You don't want to be questioning every friend's statement.
Yeah, I think you're right. And what you say in the Skeptics, we look for it. I suppose we really do. And I suppose we notice it more maybe than other people. Who knows? Maybe it's good for us to do that.
There can be a danger if you're always expecting the skeptical outcome, right? If you're always expecting and always cynical about everything that you're encountering, that can be debilitating.
It would be debilitating. And as you said before, it would be no way to live a life. You couldn't really function like that. But you do cover some wonderfully interesting skeptical, if I can use the word like that, topics in your book. For example, you talk about psychics' cold reading.
Yeah, well, we cite your great Australian Skeptic project because it's a fantastic example of looking for the evidence that people are missing, right? The predictions that nobody made. Right? And that's something that people don't tend to think about, non-skeptics, people outside of the skeptic community. Skeptics look at mentalists and psychics and say, okay, yeah, they're making a lot of predictions that can be interpreted many ways, and what are they not predicting, and what have they predicted that was wrong? So skeptics are trained to do that. But most of us don't think that way, right? Most of us take the predictions at face value and don't kind of question what the base rates are.
That's absolutely true. And we discovered that a lot of the media were, well, I don't want to use the word necessarily surprised, but they were certainly very interested to see a large-scale study like that. And I think a lot of them suspected anyway that psychic reading or psychic predicting the future really didn't work. And of course, I'm quite flattered that you would mention the Great Psychic Prediction Project in your book.
I think it's a really powerful example. And it's one of the sort of few examples that you see of filling in the sort of other possibilities that we weren't thinking about when we think about the information we have in front of us.
And you also cover the classic things like psychic readings in your book.
Yeah, absolutely.
So folks, from a skeptical point of view, this book has a lot to offer like that, but you go on. I mean, well, the book is extensive and covers so many different areas, Now, let's quickly look at something that you mentioned, that you cover, which are the outright scams.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you go into the various ways people can be fooled like that, and you go into the thinking processes, it's quite interesting. And if I may ask you to, well, briefly look at one scam for our listeners, and it's something that everybody, I guess, has heard of, but not everybody knows how that works, how the scam works. It's called a Ponzi scheme. What can you tell our listeners about that?
Yeah, so the original Ponzi scheme, all Ponzi schemes basically boil down to taking investments from one set of people, paying yourself some of it, and not actually investing it, using that money to pay back previous investors. So it becomes kind of like a pyramid scheme, except that it sustains itself by constantly having to take in new investments. Right. So the classic Ponzi schemes were ones that promised outrageous returns, right? They'll promise you 50% returns a year with guarantees, no risks, right? And there aren't too many of those anymore. I mean, maybe some of the cryptocurrency scams fall into that territory.
Yes.
But most kind of experienced investors know that nothing can guarantee 50% annual returns with no risks, right? Because the more your returns, the higher your risks in general. The Ponzi schemes they still persist, right, of course, but the more sophisticated Ponzi schemes are things like what Bernie Madoff did, right? And Madoff's a really interesting case because he didn't promise outlandish returns. In fact, over the course of his Ponzi scheme, he underperformed the main market index, right? But what he did do was promise consistent returns, 8 to 12% every year with never a down year and almost never a down month. So investments provided a safe place. They weren't actually being invested, right? He was just taking in investments, paying out, proceeds to other people and then skimming off the top. Eventually, most Ponzi schemes fall apart because you run out of new investors, right? You can't keep taking in money. So it's like the pyramid scheme where each new person coming in, the person above them gets a cut of their intake, and they have to bring in new people themselves in order to get a cut of them, and eventually just run out of people to take. Right. So, but yeah, the classic Ponzi scheme is exactly that. It's taking, and there are many, many, many variants of it.
It's a fascinating thing, the Ponzi scheme, and you can see why, especially the early investors who put their money into the scheme, and some of them can get a terrific return initially, and so they say to their friends, "Wow, you won't believe this amazing deal I've discovered." And of course, their friends get taken as well. There are so many scams out there. It's quite frightening.
Yeah, what's interesting about the Ponzi schemes is they almost always start with some sort of a sales pitch or scheme that kind of seems like maybe it could work. Right? So Ponzi's original scheme had to do with basically taking advantage of the fact that countries would issue these postal coupons. Different countries would issue postal coupons and playing on the exchange rates. Right. So the idea was he could make money by buying them in one place, selling them in another place, and then getting the returns back and rebuying them. Right. So, but it's a little bit like the sort of, recycling bottles in one state, taking them to another state where there's a bigger return. It sounds like it could kind of work, but then in practice, almost never actually does. Madoff did the same thing. He claimed that he could time the market.
And I guess the saying going through my mind at the moment is something we say quite a lot in the Skeptics. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is too good to be true.
Yeah, and the broader sense of that was if you predicted it to be true, you should be more skeptical, right? And this is actually where skeptics can get into danger, right? If you're skeptical at everything, right, and somebody reports a skeptical outcome, right, a consistent outcome, like, okay, this turned out to be nonsense, right? We're really ripe to believe that. Right, if we're critical, and we sometimes will believe that without questioning whether it itself might be wrong, right? So in the same way that as a researcher, you're much more likely to question your data if the outcome comes out the opposite of what you expected than if it comes out exactly what you were predicting.
Good point. Yes, good point. But then again, as you make clear in the book, we're only human, and we all have to battle with the brain we have, which has been evolved for certain reasons. Now, finally, and it's a very interesting thing to reference this book, but how can we evaluate a new claim or a new idea or a new scheme that's been pitched to us before we get, possibly sucked in Or on the flip side, before we make a very wise decision or a wise investment? What should our thinking processes be?
I think there are a few things you can do that are fairly straightforward. So if, let's say you get something that's a message over social media, it's a storyline that sounds really appealing to you, right? It sounds like it fits your worldview. The first question you should ask yourself is this really true? Right? And you should really ask that about anything before you kind of pass it along or forward it. Is this really true? And just asking that, it's like, okay, what information would I need to be sure that this was really true? And just taking that one extra step of asking yourself slows you down a little bit. It makes you question that truth bias and maybe makes you remain uncertain just long enough to think about it more critically. So I think that's a really good thing to ask most of the time. Is this really true? There are other questions you can ask if somebody's like pitching you on an opportunity of a lifetime. You can ask, why me? Why are they pitching this to me as opposed to any of the other people? Do I just happen to be in the right spot at the right time? Am I that lucky? Yeah. Or could it be that I'm being scammed? Right. So why me? Why here? Like, so if you're getting a great offer for a Picasso while you're on a cruise ship, right? That's why there, right? Would a Picasso typically be sold on a cruise ship? Does that make sense? Right. But it's really easy when you're in the moment. If somebody's a good salesperson and you're accepting what they're saying is true and they talk fast, just like a stage mentalist performer does, talk fast, switch the content around so that you're not realizing that they've misled you. Yeah. Then you need to kind of take that step back and say, okay, why me? Why now? Why here? Is this really true? And the real challenge is, judging that too good part, right? Is it too good to be true? Often when things fit what we want, we don't think to do that. And that's the real challenge for all of us, regardless of our worldview.
That's good advice. Folks, the book is called Nobody's Fool: Why We Get Taken In and What We Can Do About It. It's by Daniel Simons and Christopher Chabris, and that book is available through Basic Books. It's only just been released. And if people want to find out more about that book, Daniel, where can they go?
Lots of places. Basic Books website has it, but all retailers have it. And my personal website has information about it as well. So it's dansimons.com.
Look, folks, I'll add those links in this week's show notes. What an interesting read. I've almost got through it. But for now, Daniel Simons, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me on. It was great chatting.
Hi there, I'm Abhijit and I host the Rationable podcast on BeRationable.com. Every couple of weeks, I science the hell out of alternative medicines, health and nutrition fads, social media forwards, science news, and lots more. Of course, you can find all of my articles, podcast episodes, and lots more on www.berationable.com. See you there, and until then, always be rationable.
Here's Maynard's spooky action at a distance.
I've got to say, listener, tell you what, it's a jam-packorama here at the Skeptics the Pub. You can't put a spoon bent or straight between anybody, and it's been no one's. Some people at the back aren't getting a seat. They're sceptical of the fact that they aren't getting a seat. I've already had my first major sceptical argument of the evening with Tim Mendham, the editor of the magazine, Skeptical Magazine. He's obviously not sceptical enough because he told me that the Top of the Pops dancers, pants people, can't actually dance. And I've told her that I'm working on a current... it's actually just gone in for peer review, what I was working on. I actually worked on my recent paper, which I've submitted. It's called Comparative East German Televisual Choreography and its Execution and Production in the GDR. Comparing East German dancers of the Top of the East German pop dancers to top of the pops dancers to West German pop dancers, and eventually we will compare them to the solid gold dancers, but it's a bit too early in my research for that. So that will be coming up, probably never at a skeptical event, but I am going to submit it to a couple of conferences and see if anyone's interested. I expect not. But, look, someone's got to stand up for those East German dancers. They did a lot of work in the 70s and people didn't see it.
Annie is our special speaker tonight. She's an author, she's an actor, she's a business consultant, but tonight she'll be talking about her latest book, which is about how everybody gets scammed. Okay, and she talks about using critical thinking, using skeptical thinking, about a whole range of different scams, but I won't go into that because that's what she's talking about. But tonight, Jessica and Annie will be having a conversation, and you'll be able to ask questions later on, and hopefully answer them.
No.
Oh, no questions?
No, stop talking now, it's Jessica's turn.
Okay, Jessica can take over. Please,
Yes.
Annie and Jessica.
Yes.
Well, and Annie's just been laying them in the aisles here, haven't you?
I don't know, have I?
Well, yeah, everyone was doing this. Everyone was looking quiet, and no one had any smarty bum questions for you. Too, like, so what do you think? You didn't get. I mean, you must get that occasionally.
I do.
But first of all, let's get some of the major points out the way. Myers-Briggs, what a load of rubbish.
What a total load of rubbish, still used widely.
As someone who's always worked as a creative, they've never put me through that test. It's either we like you or we hate you, and you can't work it. But there's either no right answer or no wrong answer, so it can be whatever you want, can't it?
It can be whatever you want. Also, you can trick it, and why would you want to? But literally an hour apart, you'll get a different reaction to it, a different response to the quiz.
So how did it take a hold in corporate America and Australia and everywhere? How did that happen?
Because it was America, and it was evolved in the 1930s by two journalists. And then what happened was Wall Street picked it up, and then the American military picked it up. And as soon as the American military picked it up, of course, well, it must be valid.
Wow. Okay, rightio. Look, there's a whole bunch of other things, but you mentioned multi-level marketing is another thing you hate.
Yeah.
Has there ever been any good multi-level marketing? Even back in the early days, was there something where it started from a good idea that turned bad?
No, it's all bad. It's all bad, and it's mainly women. So 99% women are involved in multi-level marketing, and 99% of women do not lose money. It's just and what happens is they're lovely to you at the beginning, then they ghost you. If you're not selling, they just ghost you. It's disgusting.
Now, look, you've got some books to sell here, so I better let you go. But what is the capsule description of how people's lives will be better after reading your book?
Because you'll understand the cognitive flaws in your thinking and make better decisions and less likely to get scammed.
That's great. Thank you. Now, what website or where will people be able to find out more about you and about your books?
Oh, can you go and ask my husband because I'm hopeless.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Look, I've been told to come and speak to you as the husband. I just want to know, where could people find out more information about her books and about everything she does? What is the website for that?
Well, AnnieMcCubbin.com.
Okay. Is that hard to get?
No, I don't think so. AnnieMcCubbin.com. Yeah, no.
Okay, cool. Okay, it's just great you're able to get your name in one go and get a com, not a .com.
Yeah.
Okay, so go there one more time.
AnnieMcCubbin.com.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Yes, you said. Well, Richard, did you feel less likely to get scammed after that?
Yes.
Okay. Actually, have you ever fallen for a scam? Ever, even when you were younger?
I've been ripped off. There was a guy many years ago who ripped me off for a substantial amount. I don't know if you can strictly call it a scam. I was naive. I was young.
Oh, right, yes. Look, I've been scammed many times, really. But then again, my entire career's been a scam in some way. So I guess, it's a bit of blowback every once in a while.
I'm going to scam some people now by bending a spoon.
Okay, off you go, Richard. Hello, this is Maynard. Did you know that you can listen to the Skeptic Zone on YouTube? Yes, I know, sounds crazy, but it's true. Also, you can hear 40 logical fallacies with Michelle Bickersma and funny sketches with Richard Saunders and a host of other skeptics. Just click on the YouTube links on the homepage at skepticzone.tv.
everyone. This is Adrienne Hill from Skookum Studios in Calgary, Canada, here to read the highlights from the Australian Skeptics Newsletter. This is newsletter number 177. You can subscribe to this newsletter and get it delivered to your inbox every other week, complete with links to all the stories. Just visit www.skeptics.com.au. But now, let's see what Tim Mendham has for us this week. Hi all, says Tim. Hoaxes and frauds have featured in the news lately. When do they ever not feature, we hear you say? The TGA reports on hoax claims of COVID-related deaths in children, and groups fighting science fraud publish damning reports on peer-reviewed papers. That latter is a concern, especially for skeptics and others who rely on the concept of peer review to separate the wheat from the chaff. Read on. Okay, Tim, I'll do just that. Hoax reports of children dying from COVID vaccines. The Therapeutic Goods Administration documents reveal that reports made in 2022 about 2 boys, aged 6 and 7, were false. A spokesperson said that, quote, anyone at any time can report an adverse event to the TGA, even if the chance of it being caused by the medicine or vaccine is unlikely. While this approach ensures that there is no restriction to adverse event reporting and that we gather as much safety information as possible, it does mean that occasionally intentionally false or hoax reports are made. However, we consider that it would be a very small number, with most reporters doing the right thing, end quote. Experts fight to expose science fraud in Australia. Retractions and scientific misconduct, once thought to be extremely rare, have come into sharp focus over the past decade as scientists have discovered more cases. Ivermectin gained prominence as a treatment for COVID-19 based on a large number of fraudulent studies, some researchers argue. One estimate suggests about 1 in every 50 published papers has evidence of deliberate manipulation. Other scientists have even gone as far as claiming, quote, most published research findings are false, end quote. The end of the magic world's 50-year grudge. Quote, in 1973, Uri Geller claimed to bend metal with his mind on live television. Skeptics couldn't beat him. Now, they've joined him, end quote. That's one skeptic. There's still a lot more, in fact it's n-1, who are not so convinced, and not based on a grudge, which is what this long, very long, pro-Geller report suggests. Jesus Murphy. I think I need a glass of screech after reading that article. And who is Jesus Murphy, you might ask? Well, let's wait until the end of this segment. What it might take to overcome vaccine skepticism. A mixed bag looking at anti-vaxxer Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s run for Democratic nomination. Paul Offit's comment that vaccines are a victim of their own success, quote, they worked, so we can't see the reason for why we need them now, end quote, and what it's going to take to make people understand. Mass death? I hope not. U.S. government debunks COVID lab leak theory. A long-awaited report on COVID origins from the U.S. Office of the Director of National Intelligence has rejected the China lab leak theory, sparking outrage among Wuhan skeptics and conspiracists. The report was issued in response to the COVID-19 Origin Act, which was signed into law by President Biden in March, and which required the intelligence community to declassify all information on the topic in its possession, save information that could compromise national security or intelligence gathering sources and methods. Needless to say that conspiracy theorists are saying that the intelligence agencies must be part of a continuing global cover-up, and that their failure to come completely clean violated the law. Which makes you wonder what sort of evidence would ever convince a conspiracist? Answer: none. What forensic psychology can learn from alien abductions? Studies of the psychology of alleged alien abductions demonstrate that individual psychological differences clearly influence eyewitness processes and reports. However, while the authors say this could have an impact on criminal justice science, quote, at the present time, these factors have been virtually ignored in legal proceedings and are typically ignored in the realm of criminal investigation, end quote. Items of interest. Room with a boo. And yes, that's kind of worse than my jokes, Tim. UK couple claim a spirit who identified himself as Sir William, professed his love for Samantha, watched her shower, and even touched her while she was in bed. Samantha, surprisingly, runs a supernatural shop called The Witch's Coven. This story has nothing to do with self-promotion. Travel tip: most haunted city in the USA. As if jazz, Mardi Gras, and Creole cooking weren't enough to get you there, New Orleans is apparently the top destination for paranormal enthusiasts. Quote, drawing global interest with its rich history of ghosts and vampires, end quote, according to the proprietor of a haunted house tour company. And again, this story has nothing to do with self-promotion. Psychic. Titanic star warned her about potential ship disaster. The late Bill Paxton, star of the film Titanic and a visitor to the site of the wreck in the mid-1990s, apparently warned a psychic in February about a forthcoming ship disaster, several months before the destruction of the submersible Titan. Amazing stuff, and while he did say it was more likely to be a cruise ship than a little submersible that would be in trouble, you can bet TikToker Gemma Lonsdale is going to be dining out on this one for a while. Listicle number 1. Best Australian city to survive a zombie apocalypse. Apparently, zombies might not like the heat. Brisbane comes out safest, and Hobart comes last in a list that looks at the safest places to retire to in the face of a war between the living and the dead. This helpful info comes from new rental search company Rentola. This story has nothing to do with self-promotion. Listicle number 2. 7 most haunted highways in the world. A curious and extremely perfunctory, in fact, short, TikTok-style list full of obviously wrong photos. Not a lot of snow-covered mountains around the South Australian country town of Mount Gambier. In fact, this highway only runs from one end of town to the other, so you'd think local shopkeepers might have noticed the hauntings. Well, that was a fun news week. And this time, I have 2 Canadian words for you. Well, okay, I guess it's really 3. The first, and second, is Jesus Murphy. This was my grandmother's favorite replacement curse when I was growing up. And according to UrbanDictionary.com, she is not the only Canadian to use it. They state that it is, quote, a phrase uttered by Canadians who stub their toes, end quote. And the third word is screech. And I am not talking about the high, shrill cry. I'm talking about Newfoundland screech. When we visited the province in 2022, the first night I was there, I ordered Kenny Biddle's favorite drink, a rum and Coke. The waiter looked at me curiously and said, "You mean screech?" Screech is rum from Jamaica that is blended and bottled in Newfoundland. And it often was served on the rocks with the ice cube claimed to be from a real iceberg. And no, I did not get screeched in. And that means drinking a shot of screech, admitting you want to become a Newfoundlander, then kissing a cod. Yes, a real cod, not a fake one. maybe on my next visit. Until next time, this is Adrienne Hill.
It feels like every family has one.
You can summon aliens with your mind. The only reason why we can't see them is because we're impure and they're pure.
They might be your parents, your siblings, your cousins, and your friends.
Look, she believes that lizard people are walking on the face of the earth.
They might be your teachers, your police officers, and your lawyers.
It's just like, if you disagree with us, there are going to be severe consequences.
They could even be your elected representatives.
Everyone is out to get you. Everyone with the PhD and MD, everyone in the government is out to get you personally.
We watched them storm the Capitol of the United States.
I mean, if I'd have told you on January 5th that any group of people would try to overthrow the U.S. government, you said, no, of course not.
We saw them occupy Ottawa.
Scientific proof that racism doesn't exist. Their sources are always, trust me, bro.
But what no one is talking about is how they're destroying relationships.
I don't think people realize how damaging it is to families.
They are QAnon, and these are the stories of the people who love them.
Like, if I play into their fantasies, I can make them believe anything I want.
Look for the Q Dropped podcast on your favorite podcast platform, including YouTube, or go to porthosmedia.net/QDropped.
Now it's time once again to look back into those archives at Trove, at trove.nla.gov.au, the online resource, of course, from the Australian Government and the National Library of Australia. Thank you very much to those people, those hardworking digitising people. We have access to thousands upon thousands of newspapers and articles and so on, which we can search to dive back through Australian history. And of course, keeping in line with our general theme of skeptical topics, paranormal, supernatural, conspiracy theories, all that sort of stuff, I thought I would look for paranormal cats. Inspired by the Skeptic Zone cats. Where are they? Where are you? Where are you? They're normally jumping around the studio here. I think they're happy they've had their breakfast. Let's have a look for spooky cats. Maybe Henrietta and Maud can get some ideas. And we start with the Newcastle Sun newspaper from the 16th of June, 1921. A story called Travelling Ghost. Gladesville Mystery. Police say it is a cat. Sydney, Thursday. The Guyra ghost has apparently moved to Gladesville, but the local police have not been able to capture it. For several weeks, rumours have been current in that suburb that a strange sight had confronted various residents who happened to be passing late at night along the lonely road which leads from the ferry wharf to the town. The spectacle, it was said, took the shape of a man who was draped in a white gown, with only his white face and staring eyes visible. Police officers were sceptical, but they decided to allay the misgivings of the people by holding an all-night vigil. In fact, the two constables spent 3 full nights on duty in the ghost area, but no apparition came to make them tremble. The police are not in the humour to repeat their feat by crouching under a hedge in the cold and bitter weather throughout the night, but they declare their belief that a white cat, which lives somewhere in the neighbourhood, was mistaken for a ghost. And now we come to the pages of the Newcastle Morning Herald and Miners Advocate, dated from the 29th of January, 1913. Cats sensing ghosts. The, quotes, supernatural, end quotes, attributes of cats is discussed in an article by Mr. Elliot O'Donnell in the Christmas number of The Occult Review. After declaring that repeated experiments have proved cats to be reliable psychic barometers in haunted houses, Mr. O'Donnell asks, has a cat insight into the future? Can it presage wealth or death? And that's a word I hadn't encountered before. Presage. Verb. Be a sign of warning of imminent event, typically an unwelcome one. I am inclined to believe that certain cats can, at all events, foresee the advent of the latter, and that they do this in the same manner as the shark, crow, owl, jackal, hyena, etc., namely by their abnormally developed sense of smell. My own and other people's experiments has led me to believe that when a person is about to die, some kind of phantom, maybe the spirit of someone closely associated with the sick persons, or maybe a spirit whose special function is to be present on such occasions, is in close proximity to the sick or injured one, waiting to escort his or her soul into the world of shadows, and that certain cats sense its approach. My cats normally use their sense of smell to detect the odd tin of fish, I think. Therein, it says, this wonderful property of smell lies one of the secrets of the cat's mysterious powers. It has the psychic faculty of scent, of sensing ghosts. Some people, too, have this faculty. In a recent murder case in the north of England, a rustic witness gave it in her evidence that she was sure a tragedy was about to happen because she, quote, smelt death in the house, end quote. And it made her very uneasy. Cats possessing this particular ability are affected in a similar manner and are uneasy. Before a death in the house, I have watched a cat show gradually increasing signs of uneasiness. It has moved from place to place, unable to settle in any one spot for any length of time, had frequent fits of shivering, gone to the door, sniffed the atmosphere, thrown back its head, and meowed in a low, palliative key, and shown the greatest reluctance to being alone in the dark. This faculty, possessed by certain cats, may in some measure explain certain of the superstitions respecting them. Take, for instance, that of cats crossing one's path, predicting death. The cat is drawn to a spot because it scents the phantom of death and cannot resist its magnetic attraction. From this, it does not follow that the person who sees the cat is going to die, but that death is overtaking someone associated with that person. And it is in connection with the latter that the spirit of the grave is present, employing, as a medium of prognostication, the cat, which has been given the psychic faculty of smell that it might be so used. I think that's drawing a very long bow here from cat behavior, but nevertheless. But although I regard this story as feasible, I do not attribute it to cats with the same degree of certainty, the power to presage good fortune, simply because I have had no experience of it myself. Yet, adopting the same lines of argument, I see no reason why cats should not prognosticate good as well as evil. Cats sniffing out ghosts. And now we turn to the Daily Mercury from Queensland, dated the 2nd of March 1939, for another ghostly cat story. A cat ghost. Psychic experiences. London, February 18th, by airmail. Many strange ghost stories were related this week to a London audience by Sir Ernest Bennett, former Assistant Postmaster General and member of the Council of the Psychical Research Society. The Reverend Frederick Salt of Newbury, Berkshire, who is now in South Africa, told Sir Ernest of a visit to an aunt's house. While sitting at the table, Mr. Salt saw a cat beside his chair. He bent down to stroke it, but his hand met nothing.
"What are you looking at, Fred?"
asks his aunt.
"Have you seen the family ghost? A cat?"
Sir Ernest visited a husband and wife in a North Cheshire village. The wife said that night after night she saw a figure entering the room where she sat. Every night it put its hands around her throat as if to strangle her.
"She bore that,"
said Sir Ernest Bennett,
"with equanimity. Her husband was sceptical, but one night he heard his wife making an exclamation and turned around, saw a man standing in the doorway. He struck at him and the apparition disappeared."
Ghostly goings-on way back in 1939. And finally, from 1938, on the 28th of April, from the Morning Bulletin from Rockhampton in Queensland, cat's friendship with ghost. There is a cat in Melbourne which has provided much argument among friends about whether her conduct helps to solve the question, are there any ghosts? Her name is Ingeborg. What a great name for a cat. Ingeborg. She looks like a tiger grown incredibly old and turned by age into a diminutive creature, a cattish member of the little folk beloved by Kipling. She lives in St Kilda Street, Brighton, and was found a few years ago in a starving condition by some people who looked through an empty house. She accepted food, eating ravenously, but she would not leave the house. Finally, when the house was relet, she showed great pleasure, purring whenever anyone lifted her up. 2 emaciated, dead kittens, obviously Ingeborg's, were found in the garden. She had brought them back when they and she were removed to another home. For some time after her new friends moved in, she followed this procedure. As soon as the back door was opened, she rushed in and made a rapid tour of the rooms, apparently looking for someone. When at last she got into the front room, she was full of joy and sat on a chair in one particular place. When the chair was moved, she was no longer interested. In her favourite seat, she purred loudly, rubbing herself against an imaginary something. It was discovered that the old lady who owned her had always sat there stroking her. The chair was not the old lady's, but Ingeborg behaved always as if rubbing against someone seated in it. Did the old lady come back occasionally, or did Ingeborg suffer from hallucinations? So there we go, some cats sensing ghosts and some ghostly cats. Or some ghosts mistaken for cats. Or some cats mistaken for ghosts. One or the other. But you won't be mistaken when you look through the pages of Trove at trove.nla.gov.au. Type in your search. Could be ghosts, could be cats, could be anything you like. Because you never know what you might find. Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. In next week's episode, we hear about the end of the world. How Australia was wiped away. Well, major cities anyway were washed away with tidal waves, tsunamis. It happened again and again and again. Didn't hear about it? Tune in for next week's episode. Also, the Trove segment will look at the end of the world, the entire world. Prophecies and predictions for the world coming to an end. Thank you to those people who know that the world will probably be here for a few more weeks to come and have contributed to the Skeptic Zone, as I mentioned at the top of the episode. Your contributions via PayPal or Patreon mean that the show can continue, well, until the tsunamis come and wash us away, I guess. Don't forget, if you're not a subscriber to the Skeptic magazine, the journal from Australian Skeptics, head to skeptics.com.au and join up. And your digital subscription hardly costs anything. It's peanuts. And you get 4 digital copies of our magazine every year. And if you sign up for the physical copy, you can read it on the train, or in the bath, or skydiving, or however you please. Having said all that, for this week, this is Richard Saunders signing off from Overcast, Sydney, Australia. You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Please visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for show notes, contacts, and to access the back catalogue of episodes going back to 2008. You can follow the Skeptic Zone podcast on Twitter at Skeptic Zone, visit our Facebook page, or leave a review on iTunes. You can also support the Skeptic Zone via Patreon or PayPal. The Skeptic Zone podcast is an independent production. The views and opinions expressed on the Skeptic Zone are not necessarily those of Australian Skeptics or any other skeptical organisation. Hello to those people who continue to listen after the music. It's time, as I do every now and then, for the dice game. This is where I roll a die. It's a D10, 10-sided 3 times, and you use your predicting magical superpowers, or you cheat and try to guess which numbers. I'm going to play along with you. And, it's easy for me to cheat, of course, but there's no point. So I will play along with you. I've got 2 D10s. I'm going to save the last one to the end so we get a number from 1 to 100. But here we go. Here's the dice contraption. Roll number 1. I'm going to predict 6. Here we go. Oh, it's an 8. All right. Roll number 2. I'm going to predict, I'm going to join the Susan Gerbic fan club and predict a 5. It's a 7. Roll number 3. I'm going to predict a 1. A 1. Here it comes. It's a 9. All right. So, yeah, not so great this week for me personally. So last number, it's going to be a number from 1 to 100. 77. Now, 7's come up already. I know it has nothing to do with it, but I'm going to change my number to a 32. 32. Here it comes. You're not going to believe it. I am not making this up. I promise you. I wish this was videoed. It's 77. I should take a photograph. That's ridiculous. Okay. Today's winning numbers: 8, 7, 9, and 77.